once again. Some of you are 3 for 3, and that's a pretty good score, I would say. Batting 1,000. Just to do a little review, the first evening we gathered to reflect on coming home to ourselves and what that might mean. Realizing that each of us is a son or daughter of the Father who surrounds us with his love. And despite the effects of original sin, we hopefully come to better understand our goodness and our holiness. The second night, we focused on coming home to God and particularly trying to develop a fidelity to our daily prayer so that we can remain in touch with the Lord. And tonight our focus is on the church of which we are all members. Sometimes we hear that phrase, coming home to church, and it almost sounds like somebody who she had kind of drifted away from the church for years and years, and now they're finally coming back. And perhaps that's really a blessing and a joy. But most of you here tonight have never separated yourself from the church. You probably why you're here tonight. You're a faithful, committed member of the Catholic Church, especially the Church of St. John. And for that very reason, I think we're very aware that our church now is suffering, is in a way wounded and is in need of healing. And that has been sparked primarily by the clergy sex abuse scandal that erupted in 2002 when a team of investigators in the Boston Globe revealed a pattern of abuse going back many years in the Boston Archdiocese, and that was subsequently covered over by church officials. You may recall there was an award-winning movie, Spotlight, that basically portrayed that whole event. And I think it won Best Picture of the Year. It was well acted. But we came to realize that this was not just something that went on in Boston, but in just about every diocese in the country. Young people were taken advantage of in a terrible, terrible way. To stem the tide of this scandal and to bring justice to those who were victimized, the bishops of our country in 2003 established the Dallas Charter with zero tolerance. It was a way to address this issue in a very strong way. And we know that seemed to almost face the problem, deal with it, and then we can move on. But only a year or so ago, a grand jury in Pennsylvania, as if this whole thing exploded one more time. We thought that was over. Oh, we're done with that. Okay, we've got things straightened out. The church is reformed. We're good. And only to find out that as they listed the number of victims and priests involved, it once again, I think for all of us, caused that kind of pain. What's happening with our church? How are we going to deal with this? It even involved men on the very top echelons of the church. Cardinal McCarrick, Cardinal Pell in Australia. Names that would be revered and yet somehow were implicated in what went on. I think it pains me, certainly as a priest, but it must pain you as a Catholic to see this happening again and again, and in our own diocese as well. I was reading, just kind of accidentally, the weekly newspaper that comes out for the North Fork, and on the full back page were pictures of priests who had been accused and the names of other priests listed there. You might have seen that. Of course, these attorneys are they're going to make a fortune on this sort of thing, and and that certainly does not help. We know that this is not the first time the church has been involved in scandal, my goodness. If we know anything about church history, really the Protestant Reformation was an attempt to kind of reform the church, headed on by Luther. And we know that some of the successors of Peter even had mistresses. There were some pretty dark times if we go back centuries. And certainly if we think about St. Peter himself, when it came to the end there, and he was put to the test, Peter says, I don't know the man. So I think when we have some perspective, we realize that this is part of the church that is divine, but also very human. And I think what makes this particular issue very complex and very difficult is because it involves human sexuality and the safety and well-being of children and young persons. And certainly as married people, as lay people who have children, grandchildren, you would be very sensitive to that, and perhaps it would pain you even more. It touches a raw nerve, and for that reason, I think it's a violation of a trust that's placed in those who are responsible for shepherding the flock. But as Pope Francis has said, they have become more like wolves. Many know a very small percentage, but the damage is done nonetheless. What are some of the factors that might have brought this about? It's almost like a perfect storm. All these things seem to converge. One of them is the sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s. We had Woodstock, we had free love, we had kind of the lid blew off and, do your thing. And it's cool. Whatever it is, that's fine. And I think that atmosphere didn't help. There was also a poor formation of the clergy in the seminary. A celibate life is not typical. It's not normal. Most people choose marriage, a single life. But in the seminary, basically you had a conference by the spiritual director, and you boys, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Just take a cold shower, if you need to. Oh, that didn't work too well. But there was almost a naivete about the power of sexuality and the need to really understand that. And I think that also, because many of the cases go back to that time, the 60s and 70s. An all-male hierarchy. No women on the scene. Imagine a wife who comes home one night and she sees her husband watching porn on the computer. All right, Buster, either that thing goes or you go out the door. So that dimension, the church really didn't have laity on these review boards, people who would be able to speak to this issue. And there was a lack of transparency. There was a kind of cover-up. Why? Well, let's not have a scandal. The tragedy is that cover-up caused a greater scandal. And I think people today are perhaps more put off by that than any misdeeds. And then even those who brought forth their allegations or complaints earlier on were often pushed aside or we'll make a deal. And as Bishop Barron says in his little booklet, which is quite powerful, if you go online, Word on Fire, Bishop Robert Barron, you can easily get a copy of that little booklet. He also says, there's something evil going on here, and that's really hurting the church. The evil one is always at work. So put all of these things together and perhaps it gives us some insight into what has taken place. But you are still here. You haven't given up on the church. You even sing in the choir. You attend a mission. You come to Mass, sometimes weekdays, if not Sundays. You live a life of prayer. And that, in a way, is reassuring. You have a love for the church, as I do. And as tarnished and as perhaps diminished as it might be, this is still our church. And where would we be without it? We'd just be a lot of individuals floating around out there. And so I hope that you can appreciate your fidelity to this church, even though it's wounded and hurting and suffering, and how important it is for you to persevere, to say, I haven't given up on the church. Maybe some of your neighbors or friends or relatives have, but you're saying, no, I'm going to stay, and I'm going to try to be as good a Catholic as I can. I do want to come home to my church. One of the fears that I have, and I think we're all aware of this, is the fallout from this scandal that can impact younger generations. And in that regard, I think it's something that can really kind of get to us and perhaps create a great deal of burden inside. It's no secret that for many of younger people in our own families, your children, your grandchildren, your nieces or nephews, whoever, have not embraced the Catholic faith as you have. And I think for many older Catholics, that is a great heartache. It's painful. It evokes a lot of strong emotions. And it's really hard, I think. After all, you've given good example, the best example. You've been active in church life, served in ministry, attend Mass faithfully, try to live up to the ideals of the Catholic faith. You support the church financially, carry out the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, but for all of that, your example of faith is sometimes met with indifference or, well, I don't really have time for that, or it's not that important, or, we're involved with a lot of other stuff. It's as if some of the young people have just kind of walked away. And that can be very, very troubling and can really be heartbreaking. I know that from my own family. Sometimes even a grandchild may not be baptized. Or First Communion is somehow, well, we'll get to that someday. I know, what about the church wedding? Well, we're going to the Bahamas for the wedding, We're going to have a destination wedding. We're going someplace else. My nephew got married on the beach in Florida. Well, I wasn't officiating there. I mean, Uncle Jerry, I was just swatting flies and trying to keep the sun out of my eyes, But I'm sure you've either been through that or you've heard about it. And it's tough. It's really hard. You don't want to alienate your kids or grandkids, but by the same token, it's a kind of wound. Something that you hold dear and precious has been sort of pushed aside. I think it's important to say to you, this is not your fault. This is not your fault. You've done your best. Because guilt can get into this, and even despair. Look, I failed in this. I tried, but the faith just doesn't seem to be passed on. What can I do? Yet I think it's important to realize and to understand that you have done your best. And I know that in my own family, it's something that's really a burden. And perhaps a temptation for younger people to say, oh, look at this church, look what those priests have done. And yet, I think we have to kind of hang in there, if you will. I think about my own family, and I think there are many factors that have entered into this kind of situation. Many things. I mean, look, you go back to the days when there was nothing to do but go to church. The stores were closed, the deli was open maybe until 1 o'clock, and after that, nothing to do but go to church or have dinner at grandma's or whatever it might be. And those days are long gone. So, what I'd like to suggest tonight is what I call the spiritual survival kit. And in that kit there are 4 items for you to consider as a Catholic. And this might apply to you whether you have younger kids or teenagers or older children or grandchildren. And those 4 things are conviction, authenticity, acceptance, and trust. Well, let's begin with conviction. This is a matter of holding on to your beliefs. It's saying, you know, I'm in this for the long haul. And especially in a culture which wants a quick fix and the easy way out. And this might lead to some pretty heated conversations at the dinner table or when you're with your family. And it doesn't mean that you need to be argumentative or, waving the finger, but it's also saying what you believe in, your conviction. This is what I hold dear. And hopefully, by an honest conversation, others will realize how precious your faith is. The second is authenticity. I think for younger generations in the world today, you have to be the real deal. Any kind of hypocrisy or phoniness, do what I say but don't do what I do, it doesn't work. Younger people see right through that. Catholic light, which might mean, go to church when it's convenient and so forth. Whether it's fair or not, I think you are really called upon to be very genuine in terms of your faith. And perhaps even when you're visiting family members, to say, I'd like to go to Mass this Sunday. Would you like to come with me? And if they say no, they know that for you this is important. It's a priority. It sends a message, a powerful message, that your faith is valuable to you and not something just to be kind of tossed aside. And part of this authenticity, I think, is practicing the corporal works of mercy. I think young people are very into service. I think that's one of the qualities of younger generations. When I was growing up, I never heard of community service. What was that? Except if you, had to do time in jail or, something like that, community service. But growing up today, high school kids, college kids, they're into service. So the degree in which you embrace any kind of service, that is impressive. It's the faith that is shown in these corporal works of mercy. I'll again go back to my nephew Brian. I always pick on him because he's the black sheep in the family. So if he heard me now, he'd say, "What? Please." But he is. That's the kind of kid he is. It's like, I don't buy this religion stuff, and yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. But he knows that his parents, my sister and brother-in-law, work in a homeless shelter, go with the Sisters of Charity to take care of black women who have no place to live. They are involved in the St. Vincent de Paul. And when it comes to a crisis, they're there with a listening ear to help those kids along. And many times, several times a week, they can be seen at the 6:15 morning Mass. They don't do that to impress. They do it to live their faith, as you do. I hope you never underestimate the power of that witness. Just being here for the mission. You might say, what? What's that? What's a mission? I think this kind of example has caused my nephew Brian to at least question his faith, and perhaps even sometimes to get to church. He's agreed to have his children attend Catholic school. Of course, Grandma and Grandpa are picking up the tab, but as you might expect, okay, but what can I say? You've probably done the same, you know? How much money do you put into a Catholic high school or Catholic college, you know? And the results? Okay. But you know, there's a trickle-down effect, I think, from all of this. And it came home to the family not too long ago when Brian's two twin girls, Reese and Sloan, where do they get these names from? What did happen to Mary and Joseph, you know? Reese and Sloan. I'm sure you have some names in your family too. But one day, Brian is explaining to the girls, they're like 5, 6 years old. He says, now girls, you know, money is important because, you know, we have to provide food for the family and do this, that, and the other thing. And Reese pipes up and says, oh, no, Daddy. Jesus is the most important thing. Oh, okay. Quieted him down. And I know one of the ways I think that you perhaps come to appreciate your place in the family circle is when there's a crisis, or a tragedy, or a big decision. What do these kids do? They go to you and they say, Grandma, Grandpa, would you say a prayer for me? I hope you never dismiss that or underestimate what that says. They see you as a link to God. Maybe they feel out of place being in church, or, you know, they haven't prayed in ages. But even that wish says they have faith inside. And I hope you can hear that and take comfort in the fact that they go to you as the prayer person in their lives. And that's a beautiful gesture of trust and confidence, but it's also a witness to your faith in this family. Never underestimate the power of your prayer and that witness. And maybe someday, they might just say to you, you know, I want what you have. So, conviction, authenticity, acceptance. To help young people to see the church in a positive way, I don't think it helps if we, you know, finger wagging and, you know, sarcastic remarks like, wouldn't it be nice if you showed up in church one Sunday? Yeah. Oh, you're coming at Easter? Surprise, surprise. Okay. That only puts salt on the wound. And it really doesn't do any good. They know. They know where you stand and where they should be. And I think today, as we look at family life, you know, this fella's maybe a son or daughter, you know, they've got 2 kids, they've got a big mortgage, they've got a pressure cooker job, the wife is working, the husband's working, you know, particularly in the Northeast. It's you know, it's a kind of a whirlwind of a lifestyle. And perhaps if you recognize that, you know, we can't compare to the 50s or the 60s. It doesn't work. But if only you can touch their lives in maybe simple ways, even something like saying grace at table, if you have the opportunity. It's a doorway in. You know, they're not in church, but just that prayer says something. You know, you ever watch Blue Bloods? Yes. You know, and they say grace. I can't believe it. They're actually saying grace on TV, and they say the word Christ. But there it is, those simple things that point to accepting where these young people are. You might even talk about your church experience. Tell them I went to a mission. Yeah, it's fine. It might be worth mentioning that when you come to church, Father Larry gives these captivating homilies every single Sunday, and you say, how does he do it? It's amazing. It's amazing. But just talking about that, talking about your church life, not in a boastful way, but just saying, or yes, I am upset about the clergy abuse scandal. But again, assure them of your prayers. If there are grandkids around, yeah, take them to church. Show them the rosary. Teach them a prayer. My sister's always getting in there with her little tricks, and it works. The fourth quality is trust. And what I mean by that is, it's God's doing, not ours. And sometimes you have to say, Lord, you take care of it. And the Lord will. These young people are your children, or your grandchildren, your nephews and nieces, but they're also part of God's family. And He watches over them and cares for them even more than we do. God also sees the good they do, and they do good. And it's fair to recognize that and say that to them. It doesn't always have to be churchy stuff. Jesus didn't say a lot about getting to the synagogue every week, but He said an awful lot about healing the blind and the lame and feeding the hungry and sheltering the naked. So maybe your example and your values and your faith has sunk in more than you realize. Perhaps not so much in church categories, but in ways of living a decent, moral life and serving others. Just being good parents and good grandparents and good friends. Trust that all your efforts have not been in vain. Now, the church has been around a very long time, and I don't expect it to fade away anytime soon. We're going through some rough days, and right now the outlook for the future tells us that we need people of conviction, authenticity, acceptance, and trust. We may not be the miracle workers, but we have our part to play at this time in this church of ours that we know and love. So I invite you to live your faith life to the full and trust that your reward will be great in heaven. And so we've kind of come to the close of our little mission here at St. John's. I thank you for coming, for listening, for praying for its success. Hopefully some word, some thought, some idea, some moment of grace has touched your heart, and you feel a little closer to yourself, to your God, and to your church. And remember, don't spit in the mirror. Give God 1% of your day in prayer, and persevere. This church needs you.